The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the Gulf of Mexico, transforming the surface into a sheet of hammered gold that made Earl Tompkins squint despite his weathered baseball cap. At 63, he'd been working these waters off Florida's coast for 37 years, and his hands moved with the practiced efficiency of decades as he guided his 30-foot commercial fishing vessel toward the next set of buoys, marking his crab traps. The Miss Dolores, named after his late wife, cut through the gentle swells with the steady rhythm of her diesel engine. Earl had built his life around this routine. Out before dawn, checking traps, sorting catch, returning to port by early afternoon. It was honest work that had fed his family and put 2 kids through college, even if it had never made him rich. Heavy. One today, he muttered to himself, noting how the buoy line stretched taut as he hooked it with his gaff. The electric winch groaned to life, its motor straining against the weight 40 feet below. Good weight usually meant a decent haul, and with blue crab prices up this season, every pound counted toward his mortgage payment. Earl's weathered hands worked the controls with muscle memory, watching the blue and white rope emerge from the depths, dripping seawater that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. The trap appeared through the green-blue water, and he could already see the telltale movement of crabs inside the wire mesh. Blue swimmers, their claws raised in futile defense, scuttled over each other in the confined space. He swung the trap. Over his sorting table, a scarred piece of marine plywood that had seen thousands of hauls over the years. The familiar smell of salt water and sea life filled his nostrils as he opened the trapdoor. Crabs spilled out in a clicking, clacking mass of shells and claws, their legs scrambling for purchase on the wet surface. But something else caught his ajar flash of pink among the browns and blues of the crabs. Earl paused, squinting at the unexpected color. Reaching past the agitated crustaceans, he pulled out what was clearly a cell phone encased in a waterlogged pink protective case. "What the hell?" he said aloud, holding the device up to the morning light. The phone was obviously an iPhone, though the screen remained black and lifeless after what must have been an extended underwater stay. Algae had begun to colonize the pink case, and dried kelp wrapped around one corner like seaweed jewelry. Tiny barnacles had attached themselves to the edges, and the home button was completely obscured by marine growth. Earl turned the device over in his calloused palm, studying it with the curiosity of a man who'd seen the ocean give up its secrets in unexpected ways. The pink case suggested it belonged to a young woman. His granddaughter Emma had a similar one. But this phone had clearly been underwater for quite some time. Judging by the biological growth covering it, he glanced at his GPS, noting the coordinates. The trap had been soaking for 2 weeks in open water, about 8 miles from shore where the continental shelf began its drop into the deep Gulf. These commercial fishing grounds were well beyond the casual boating area where tourists might accidentally drop their phones. Earl set the device aside and continued sorting his catch, separating the keeper-sized crabs from the undersized ones that would go back into the water. But his mind kept returning to the pink phone. Something about finding personal items in the ocean always unsettled him, reminded him that the Gulf was more than just a workplace, was a place where people's lives intersected, sometimes, tragically, over the years. He'd pulled up all manner of lost items in his traps and nets. Watches, sunglasses, fishing tackle, even a class ring from Fort Myers High School that he'd managed to return to its grateful owner through a newspaper ad. Once, he'd found a wedding ring tangled in a gillnet, which he dutifully turned over to the Coast Guard, The ocean had a way of keeping secrets until it decided to give them up, and Earl had learned to respect that mysterious process as he worked through the rest of his traps, checking each one with the methodical precision of long practice. Earl's thoughts kept drifting back to the phone. The more he considered it, the more certain he became that this wasn't just another case of a tourist dropping their device off a party boat. The location was too remote, too far from normal recreational boating areas, and the amount of marine growth suggested the phone had been underwater for months, maybe even longer, by the time he finished his route and headed back toward Goodland Marina. Earl had made up his mind. He'd run the phone over to the Collier County Sheriff's Office. Let them figure out what to do with it. Maybe it was nothing, just another piece of ocean junk. But maybe, just maybe it was something more. Something that mattered to someone. The Miss Dolores chugged steadily toward shore, her diesel engine maintaining its reliable rhythm. Earl cleaned his hands with a wet towel and picked up the phone again, studying it more closely. Despite the marine growth, he could make out part of a serial number etched into the metal frame. If the authorities wanted to track down the owner, they'd have something to work with. As the marina came into view, Earl reflected on the strange ways the ocean worked. In all his years of fishing, he'd learned that the Gulf kept its own schedule, revealing things when it chose to, not when people wanted answers. Today, for reasons he couldn't fathom, it had decided to give up this small piece of someone's life, standing at the evidence counter of the Collier County Sheriff's Office. An hour later, Earl handed over the barnacle-covered phone to Deputy Martinez, thinking it was just another piece of ocean debris. The young officer took down his information: name, address, boat registration, the coordinates where he'd found it tanned, gave Earl a receipt for the property. "Anything else you can tell me about where you found this?" Deputy Martinez asked, studying the marine-encrusted device. Earl shrugged. Trap had been down for 2 weeks. Water's about 40 feet deep out there, maybe a little more at high tide. Not a place you'd expect to find a phone unless it traveled some distance. The deputy nodded, making notes. "We'll run the serial number, see if we can identify the owner. Might be connected to a missing person case or insurance claim." Earl nodded and headed back to his truck, thinking his part in this small mystery was over. He couldn't know that the waterlogged device would soon shatter a year-long silence and set in motion a chain of events that would expose a horrific conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of local law enforcement. As he drove home to his small concrete block house in Goodland, Earl thought about his late wife Dolores and how she'd always said the ocean was full of stories. Today, he'd just handed one of those stories to the authorities, hoping they'd know what to do with it. Grant Westfall was hunched over his drafting table in his home office, reviewing architectural plans for a new medical complex in downtown Naples, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Collier County Sheriff's Office, and his hand hesitated over the device. Random calls from law enforcement never brought good news, and Grant had learned to dread unknown numbers after the past year of his life. The plans, spread across his desk, clean lines, precise measurements, a world where everything fit together according to logical principles, suddenly seemed like artifacts from a different existence. His throat constricted as he answered, "Hello, Mr. Westfall. This is Detective Patricia Chen with the Collier County Sheriff's Office. Are you the father of Kira Westfall?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Grant's vision blurred as the architectural drawings in front of him lost focus. His free hand gripped the edge of the drafting table, knuckles white with sudden tension. "Yes," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm her father, Has something happened? Have you found her? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Grant could hear the careful consideration in Detective Chen's voice when she spoke again. Mr. Westfall, we've recovered some property that may belong to your daughter. Would you be able to come to our offices this afternoon? Property. Grant was already standing, his chair rolling backward to crash into the bookshelf behind him. What kind of property? A cell phone was found by a commercial fisherman. The serial number matches the device registered to your daughter. I understand she's been missing for approximately 1 year. Grant's legs nearly gave out. He gripped the edge of his desk harder, his knuckles standing out like white stones. The room seemed to tilt around him, and for a moment he thought he might faint. Yes, he said, his voice breaking. She disappeared in the Everglades. You found her phone. Where? I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, Mr. Westfall. Can you come in? I'm on my way. Grant hung up and stood in his office, breathing heavily. For the first time in 12 months, there was news. Real news. Not another false sighting or mistaken identity or well-meaning stranger who thought they'd seen a young blonde woman somewhere in southwest Florida. This was tangible Kira's phone, found by a fisherman, with a serial number that matched. He looked around his office, taking in the familiar surroundings that suddenly felt foreign. The framed photographs of completed projects, the awards from the American Institute of Architects, the carefully organized desk that had once represented the ordered world of his professional, of it seemed to belong to someone else now. Someone who'd lived in a world where daughters didn't vanish into the Everglades without a trace.